My name is Kevin Stillwagon, and I am an anti-vaxxer by choice. I have never been vaccinated for anything ever in my entire life. I've been all over the world. I'm 67 years old, and I'm in very, very good health. I'm also a retired chiropractor, and that's by choice. And I'm also a retired airline captain, but that's not by choice. I was actually forced to retire in the summer of 2020, about 2 years and 3 or 4 months before my normal retirement age, because I refused to comply with their mandate that I had to wear a face mask. And so that was basically the end of my career. I started to speak out about the dangers of medical mandates, including face masks on children, and what I thought was going to be a mandated shot called a vaccine, which most certainly did happen. So I was early warning people about this, talking about it in school board meetings and county commissioner meetings. And some of my little rants got on the internet and got pretty popular, and I just kept it going. And that's why I'm still here today talking about the truth, what's really going on out there with the dangers of vaccines and medical mandates. People ask me why I was never vaccinated. Well, my father was a chiropractor, and so he understood the physiology of the body and knows where the real protection of infection resides, and it doesn't come from shots called vaccines. And we can talk about that a little more in depth, but I elected to continue this in my life and, never get a vaccine of any kind. And also for our daughter, my wife and I talked about it, and with our daughter, we decided to keep her completely unvaccinated as well. And again, the reason that I chose to do that is because I understand where the real protection of infection resides, and that's in what's called the epithelial barrier. It's what separates the inside of us from the outside. We have natural cellular protection that protects us from becoming infected, and it was provided to us at birth, and it works perfectly well. The problem that we found ourselves with this idea called a vaccine is that science kind of got misdirected with the thought that injecting something through that barrier, totally ignoring the barrier, and putting a foreign substance into the body would create something called antibodies. And it does do that. And that's what the science says. You inject something, and if it's a foreign protein, the immune system of your body will build antibodies against that. But the thing is, those antibodies are what are called serum antibodies. They're always inside of you. They're circulating in your blood and in your lymph, and they cannot prevent you from becoming infected. They can only react to the infection when it does happen. And so science got muddled in this idea because they know that there's power in antibodies, and there most definitely is. In fact, antibodies can absolutely save your life. If you were bitten by a rattlesnake, for example, and you're taken to the hospital, the first thing they do is they put anti-venom in you. Well, what's anti-venom? Anti-venom is antibodies that were created in another animal that experienced the rattlesnake venom in its entirety, the whole thing, all of it. And the antibodies that are created now are going to be perfect antibodies. And so they will take those and put those in you, and they will be able to neutralize the rattlesnake venom, and that can save your life. And so the idea of doing that kind of got muddled because science thought that, well, if we just inject part of these pathogenic organisms that are associated with disease, if we inject parts of those uh, organisms into the body will create antibodies, and the antibodies will protect you. Well, there's partial truth there, and there's also some danger that lies there. And the reason is because the antibodies that are going to be created are not well-rounded, robust antibodies. And in order for you to have that true protection that's going to last you an entire lifetime, you have to experience the entire pathogenic organism, whatever it is. And it's got to come through the epithelial barrier in a natural way. And when it does, then your immune system is able to experience all of it, the whole thing. And it will build specific antibodies that have memory, and your body will remember how to create these antibodies later if you do experience the infection. And these are going to be the ones that are going to actually be more protective and will protect you from becoming infected. Now, how that works is when you experience a natural infection, there's a specialized antibody that's created that's called a secretory IgA antibody. And it's secreted out into the mucus, the mucosal lining that protects that barrier that separates the inside of you from the outside. So this IgA antibody that you experience from a natural, normal infection will be there in that mucosal layer to protect you and prevent you from becoming infected. When you inject something into the body, you will get IgA antibodies for sure, but they're going to be serum IgA antibodies. They are not secreted into that mucosal layer, and they cannot protect you from becoming infected. Another problem with these antibodies that are created by shots called vaccines is they end up becoming suboptimal antibodies. And what that means is they will have the ability to tell your immune system to do something with the invader that it normally would not do. There are two levels of this. One is called antibody-dependent enhancement of infection, and the other is called antibody-dependent enhancement of disease. Now, the antibody-dependent enhancement of infection, how that works is these antibodies that are suboptimal are shaped like the letter Y. And so the Y part of that antibody will attach to the foreign invader for sure. They do attach to the invader, but the exposed tail of the Y is the signaling end of that antibody, and it tells the immune cells what to do with what's attached to that Y part, the business end of the antibody. And so the whole thing is called the antigen-antibody complex because they're connected. And so if you have the suboptimal antibody, what happens is the tail of the Y will signal your immune cells to take in the foreign invader, but instead of destroying it like they normally would do, the tail of the Y is signaling that immune cell to actually make more copies of that invader, whatever it is. And then these copies get released into the bloodstream and they can affect other cells. And so that makes the infection easier to happen, easier to spread, you see? So that's why these people that keep insisting on getting these booster shots to, increase their level of antibodies, they can't figure out why they keep getting COVID. Like Joe Biden, he's had 6 booster shots to our knowledge, and he was recently diagnosed with COVID again. And so that's called antibody-dependent enhancement of the infection. They put the word antibody in there because you have to have the antibodies, and they have to be suboptimal. Well, they are definitely there, and you got these antibodies from the shot. They're suboptimal. But it actually can get worse than that because there's another level of this that's called antibody-dependent enhancement of the disease. Now, what's that mean? Well, the disease process is the symptoms that you experience. So it can actually make the symptoms worse. And see, this is all part of the lie that's been propagated in the minds of all Americans and also people all over the world. They were initially told what? That this shot, if you got it, you would not get COVID, right? Remember that? They told us all that? No. And Deborah Birx admitted it, and Fauci finally admitted it, that yeah, it does not prevent the infection. You can get the shot and you can still get COVID and you can spread it to others. So then they kind of changed that narrative, didn't they? They said, well, if you get the shot, then it'll keep your symptoms less and you won't have as bad of an experience with the disease. Well, that's an absolute lie also because of what is called antibody dependent enhancement of the disease process. The way that works is you've created so many of these suboptimal antibodies by insisting on going out and getting these booster shots that once you do get infected again, and you will, when you get infected again, now these antibodies will attach to the invader and they attach in such a way that two or more will attach to that invader, and the tails of the Y will signal what's called the complement cascade to take place. Well, the complement cascade is actually the arm of your immune system that's the heavy artillery. It's actually reserved for localized and chronic infections that are really, really hard to get rid of. And you do not want this complement cascade or this complement system activated when it doesn't need to be. And the reason is because it's very aggressive, it's highly inflammatory, and it creates a lot of collateral damage. So what happens is, if you get this complement cascade that kicks off, you've got 15 quintillion proteins circulating in your blood and lymph that you were born with. It's part of the innate immune system. And so when you get this complement cascade that kicks off, the tails of the Y signal one of those proteins to start a cascade. And the cascade of events is all of these proteins changing shape and they communicate with each other. And the end result is something called the membrane attack complex. And it's very aggressive. It will go after any cells that have these spike proteins attached, and it will take out those cells. But the problem is it's not selective, and some of this damage can occur to normal cells in normal tissues that are nearby those areas. And now you start to have excess inflammation, more white blood cells are drawn in like neutrophils, and neutrophils are the ones that really create a lot of havoc because they secrete toxic cytokines that do cellular damage. And so this can start building up. And when it does, your symptoms now get worse. It can happen in localized areas. Like, for example, it can happen in the heart. And when that happens, it's called myocarditis. It can also be systemic. It can affect all tissues of the body in general. And this has a special name, and it's called MIS, which stands for multi-inflammatory syndrome. And they put a letter A on the end to designate that it happens in adults. And they also can put the letter C on the end of that, which indicates that it can happen in children. And I can tell you that there have been perfectly healthy children that have been injected with this stuff. And it kicked off that cascade that I'm talking about, and it ended up in multi-inflammatory syndrome, and it's deadly. And some of these children have died, and it's totally unnecessary. And so those are the two things that suboptimal antibodies can do to you, all as a result of getting a shot called a vaccine. Again, they're antibody-dependent enhancement of the infection and also antibody-dependent enhancement of the disease process itself. So again, I need to drive the point home that the only way that you're going to get that full, robust protection of infection is to experience the natural infection. But the problem is people are afraid of that. They're afraid of experiencing a natural infection because they've been told that diseases like rabies, for example, are 100% mortality rate, meaning that if you're infected with the rabies virus, it will kill you and you will die. Well, that's not true because there are actually people that have been tested for rabies antibodies, and these people have never been vaccinated against rabies, yet they have protection against rabies. That can only happen with experiencing the rabies virus. So they were infected and they never even knew it. The same thing happens with the polio virus. And when you say polio to a parent, I mean, it scares the daylights out of them. They immediately picture their child being in crutches or an iron lung or something like that. And I can tell you that 70% of all polio infections, and I'm talking about a true infection, the polio virus has gotten through that epithelial barrier and is in the blood and in the lymph. You are infected. 70% of people that get infected are going to have absolutely no symptoms whatsoever, completely asymptomatic. About 24% of them are going to have symptoms of the common cold, and about 4% are going to have what's called temporary flaccid paralysis, where you start to have evidence of some paralysis in the body, but it's temporary. It resolves itself and it completely goes away. And so the polio vaccine or the polio infection is another one that scares people. You can look this up yourself. It's on the CDC website. If you look up the etiology of polio, you'll see that 70% of all polio infections are completely asymptomatic. That means that you are infected by the polio virus. It got through the epithelial barrier that I'm talking about, and it is in your blood and in your lymph. And it's less than 1% of the population that get infected that are going to end up having the permanent paralysis or neurological damage of some sort. And it's the people that have immunosuppression that are going to be that less than 1% category. And even if you look at the package insert for the polio vaccine, it will tell you, do not give this vaccine to a person with immunosuppression. Why is that? Because their immune system can't handle it. And it can do what's called provocation of disease. That means it will end up creating the exact disease process that it's supposed to be preventing. And so what are we doing? We're going around and trying to vaccinate everybody to protect the less than 1%. It doesn't work like that. What you're doing is you're putting the healthy population at risk. What we should be doing is showing people that are in the immunosuppressive category, the less than 1%, we should be showing them how to make their immune system stronger so that they can prevent themselves from becoming infected with these diseases. And if they do get infected, then we support them with palliative care so that we can get through the infection. That's the way we should be handling it. So the question is often asked to me, is the medical profession starting to acknowledge some of the things that I just talked about? Yeah, they are. Slowly but surely, some scientists and medical doctors are starting to wake up. And the wake-up call was the COVID shot, for sure, because that was a platform that was recognized as being a failure for quite a number of years, the mRNA or the messenger RNA platform. And they've tried working with this stuff for a long time. It's gene therapy, basically. And they saw that it was a failure. And so they pushed this out rapidly into the population. And some medical doctors saw this as a warning flag. And they started to look into other vaccines as well. And what they found is that all of the childhood vaccines that are recommended on the CDC schedule were never even properly safety tested. They didn't do a placebo trial, which really needs to be done. I mean, how can you check for safety if you don't have a placebo group where somebody was injected with something that was completely inert, like saline? They never did that in those childhood vaccines. They were comparing them with other vaccines that they thought were, quote, safe and effective, and they really weren't. And so when doctors started looking into things like this and seeing that placebo studies were not done, and even the fact that some of the safety trials were extremely short, like for the hepatitis B vaccine, for example, that trial was only 5 days long. That doesn't give you enough time to determine if there's going to be any neurological damage in a small baby that was injected with that stuff, you see? So all of these supposed safe and effective vaccines that have been pushed on people truly are neither safe nor effective. Yeah, so the question is asked is there any data available that shows that countries that have less vaccine rates are healthier? And the answer is yes. I just did this myself. If you look in some of the databases that are available, like Our World in Data, for example, you can find out which countries are the most heavily vaccinated and which countries are the least vaccinated. And if you do that, you will find that countries like the United States that heavily vaccinate and supposedly require children to have all of these vaccines before they can get into public school. Uh, they'll tell you that, but in most states in the United States, you can get a religious exemption and not have to go through that. A lot of people don't know that. There's still about 5 states, though, that do not have that uh, ability to get a religious exemption. But either way, most people still believe that, yeah, you got to get these shots to have your child go to school. So that makes the United States of America one of the largest heavily vaccinated populations, especially for children. If you do a comparison on infant mortality rates in countries like America that are heavily vaccinated and countries that are not heavily vaccinated, heavily vaccinating their children, our infant mortality rates are worse, way worse. In fact, if you look at chronic disease in children also, you can see that countries that heavily vaccinate their children have way more problems with chronic disease. So yeah, the data is available. It's out there. The same thing happened with the COVID experience. And you can look this up also. You can see that the countries that heavily forced their populations to get this shot ended up having more mortality than certain countries, impoverished countries like Haiti and certain parts of Africa. They turned out better than we did. So yeah, there's a message there that needs to be heeded for sure.